The colony lights burned bright against the endless snow. Inside the walls, humans lived in warmth, food, and power, but outside, the night wind screamed like a living thing. Cold could kill in minutes, and no one survived long under the frozen sky. She was out there, an alien widow, small and fragile against the storm. Her thin cloak was torn, her feet bare against the biting ice. She moved from door to door, knocking with shaking hands. Her voice cracked as she begged, "Please, I need shelter only for tonight," but every door stayed shut inside the houses, humans whispered, listening but refusing. They feared punishment. They feared the law. The rules of the colony were clear. No alien blood inside, no shelter, no food, no mercy. One broken rule meant exile, and exile meant death. The widow's eyes filled with frozen tears. She had once lived here with her mate, working in the lower mines, but since his death she was nothing. No family, no home, only a body unwanted. Now the storm would finish what the colony had started. Her legs shook, her breath came in sharp clouds. She leaned against a wall, sliding. Slowly to the ground, snow gathered on her shoulders, ice clung to her hair. Her body was failing piece by piece. The stars above blurred, her heart slowed. Her last thought whispered, "So this is how it ends." But someone was watching. From the shadow of a quiet house, a pair of human eyes followed her. He stood behind his window, the frost blurring his sight. His name was Daniel, one of the settlers who had never quite fit in. He had seen the cruelty before, how the colony turned its back on the weak. But now it was not just cruelty, it was death, slow and cold. Right before his eyes, Daniel's hand pressed against the window glass. His breath fogged the pain as he stared at the figure crumbling in the snow. Every part of him screamed to open the door, to pull her inside. But fear chained him. The laws were strict, the punishment absolute. If anyone saw, if anyone knew, his life would be over. Yet as the wind howled, the sound was almost like a cry. It echoed deep inside him, a cry he could not ignore. The widow's head dropped forward, her body still now. Daniel's heart pounded. He turned away. He walked 3 steps back into his small house, but the silence behind him was louder than the storm outside. It pressed on him, heavy and sharp. He clenched his fists, his chest tight with anger, at himself, at the colony, at the cold. And then, without another thought, he moved. The door creaked open, spilling light into the snow. The storm rushed in, sharp and merciless. Daniel stepped out, his boots crunching against the ice. He crossed the distance in seconds, kneeling beside her. Her skin was like frozen stone, her breath weak and thin. "Stay with me," he whispered, though she could not hear. He lifted her in his arms, her weight almost nothing, the cold bit at his face warning him. But he turned back toward the light of his house, his door still open, waiting. Inside, warmth hit them like a wave. The fire cracked. The air smelled of smoke and metal. Daniel shut the door quickly, leaning against it, his chest heaving. The widow lay still in his arms, her skin pale blue, her lips trembling. He laid her on his bed, pulling blankets over her shaking form. Her eyes flickered open for a moment, cloudy. With pain, she looked at him, with fear, with confusion, with the last sparks of hope. "You? Why?" she whispered, her voice a dry breath. Daniel only shook his head, his jaw set tight. "Because no one else would," he answered softly. The storm outside howled against the walls, but in this one small house there was silence. Silence. And the beginning of a dangerous secret. For the first time that night, the widow closed her eyes in warmth instead of cold. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt alive. Not because of safety, but because he had chosen to break the rules, and the colony would never forgive him if they found out. The storm raged outside, but inside Daniel's small home, the fire gave weak light. The alien widow lay wrapped in blankets, her body shaking as if the cold still lived inside her. Her breathing was shallow, each breath a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. Daniel sat on a chair near the bed, staring at her face. Her skin had strange patterns, glowing faintly in the firelight. marks of a world not human. But in her pain, she looked only like a person dying, not an enemy, not a stranger, only a life struggling to hold on. He poured hot water into a cup, his hands trembling as he held it close to her lips. "Drink," he whispered. At first, her eyes fluttered closed, as if she could not hear. But then, with a weak effort, she sipped. The warmth traveled through her. Her throat moved slowly. Her voice, cracked and soft, escaped between breaths. Why help me? When others shut their doors, Daniel's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the wooden floor. He could not explain it, not in words. He only knew that to leave her outside would have burned inside him worse than any punishment. "I couldn't watch you die," he said, finally, his voice rough. "That's all?" The widow studied him, her eyes still clouded but searching. She had seen humans before, but none who broke rules for her kind. Her mate had told her long ago that some humans carried strange hearts, hearts that did not always follow orders, hearts that made dangerous choices. Perhaps this man was one of them. The fire cracked, shadows danced across the walls. Daniel rose to check the curtains, pulling them tight. He knew the danger had only begun. The colony punished anyone who gave shelter to aliens. The rules were written in metal and fear. If a neighbor saw light too late at night, if footsteps in the snow betrayed him, it would be the end for both of them. He returned to the chair, lowering his voice. "You must stay quiet. No one can know you're here." She gave a small nod, though her body was weak. The silence between them grew heavy, filled only by the howl of the storm outside. Every gust against the house sounded like a fist on the door. Every crack of ice sounded like boots in the snow. Daniel could feel his heart racing faster than the wind itself. The widow spoke again, her words slow, heavy, as if each cost her strength. They called me burden after my mate died. No one looked at me the same. No food, no fire, only empty hands pushing me away." Her eyes glistened, reflecting the flames. "They left me for the cold, because it was easier." Daniel swallowed. Hard. He had known the colony was harsh, but hearing her voice made it real. He remembered moments of his own, times he was called useless, a mistake, someone better left behind. He had buried those memories, but now they returned, sharp and raw. "You're not a burden," he said firmly, leaning forward. "Not while I'm here." Her eyes widened, not believing, but a tiny spark lit inside them. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen. Hours passed slowly, the storm still beating the colony walls. Daniel fought sleep, his ears alert for any sound beyond the fire. Once he thought he heard movement outside, a crunch in the snow, a shadow through the window frost. His chest tightened. His hand moved to the knife on the table. But when he looked again, nothing was there. Only darkness and wind. Still, unease stayed with him. Someone might already suspect. The colony was. Always watching, always waiting for weakness. The widow drifted into uneasy sleep, her breaths steadier now. Daniel watched her, his thoughts twisting like the storm. He had saved her life, but in doing so he had signed his own death if caught. Yet deep inside, something stronger than fear whispered. This was the right path. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. Would the colony guards knock on his door demanding entry? Would neighbors whisper of strange lights and footsteps? Or would the widow recover enough to stand, to speak, to share secrets of her kind? The fire dimmed, wood turning to glowing embers. Daniel placed another log, the sparks rising like stars. He glanced again at the sleeping alien, her chest rising and falling under the blankets. For now she lived. For now the door had opened, but he knew well. Every door opened once must be closed again, or someone else would walk through. And if that someone was the colony, mercy would turn to chains. The night ended with silence, but the silence was sharp, like a blade waiting in the dark. The storm ended by morning, leaving the colony buried under fresh snow. From the outside, Daniel's house looked quiet, no different from the others. But inside, a secret breathed quietly under warm blankets. The alien widow was alive, her skin no longer blue with cold, though weakness still chained her body. Daniel stood near the window, careful to move the curtain only an inch. He scanned the streets outside, where colonists walked in heavy coats. Their faces were tight, their eyes sharp, always watching, always judging. He let the curtain fall, a shadow of fear resting heavy on his shoulders. Behind him, the widow stirred, her voice soft and raw. "You hide me from them," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his back still to her. "If they know, we are both finished." She looked at the small room. Rough walls, a cracked table, one fire keeping back the cold. It was simple, poor, but to her it was more than walls. It was safety, a safety she had begged for outside but never found until now. Her eyes studied him. "You risk everything," she said. Daniel turned, meeting her gaze for the first time that day. "I know what it's like to be unwanted," he answered quietly, her head tilted, confusion in her tired face. Daniel did not explain, not fully, but in his chest the memory burned. Once, long ago, he too had stood in the cold. Not snow, but silence, rejection, the cruel laugh of others. That pain still lived inside him, and seeing her outside last night had torn it open again. Hours crawled, silence filling the house, but in silence, secrets often grow. At midday, Daniel left briefly to fetch water, warning her not to move. The widow lay still, but her eyes drifted. Across the room, on the table lay small tools, scraps of metal, unfinished work of human hands. And on the wall she saw something else. A drawing, worn and old. It showed Daniel standing with a group of settlers, but he was at the edge, apart from the rest. She wondered if that was his secret. He was never truly one of them. That night the storm returned, gentler but full of whispers. Daniel sat by the fire, knife in hand, sharpening the blade, though there was no work to cut. The widow's voice broke the silence. "My mate, he died in the mines," she said. Her eyes stared into the flames, not at him. "The collapse buried half our crew. Only humans were saved first. By the time they reached us, he was gone." Her throat trembled, but she forced the words out. "After that I was nothing, just a mouth to feed, a weight on their rules." Daniel's hand stilled on the knife, the sound of metal against stone fading. He did not speak at first, but the firelight showed the anger burning in his eyes. "Finally," he muttered, "they talk of order, but it's only fear, only control." The widow turned her gaze toward him, her voice low. "And now, they will punish you for saving me." Daniel met her eyes, his voice steady. "Then let them try." Outside, the wind carried strange sounds. A crunch in the snow. A low murmur. Almost like voices. Daniel rose instantly. Knife in hand, his body tense, he moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough. Through the frost, a shadow shifted. Someone moving close to the house, his chest tightened, his mind racing. Had someone followed him last night? Had the colony already guessed? The widow struggled to sit up, her body weak but her instincts sharp. She felt the danger in the air, the same danger she had felt many nights before. Daniel turned, whispering, "Stay down." He killed the fire, quickly letting darkness swallow the room. Only the sound of the storm remained, but beneath it soft steps crunched closer, closer, until they stopped outside the door. The silence was unbearable. Daniel gripped the knife tighter. His breath shallow. Would the door crash open? Would guards flood inside? But after a long moment, the sound faded. The steps moved away, leaving only the wind behind. Daniel waited, frozen in place, before slowly lighting the fire again. The widow watched him with wide eyes, her voice shaking. "They are searching," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his face hard. "Yes, someone suspects." The house filled with uneasy silence once more. But now the silence carried more than fear. It carried a bond, two lives tied together by the secret they shared. For Daniel, it was no longer about rules. It was about something deeper, something he could not yet name. For the widow, it was more than survival. It was the first time since her mate's death that she felt seen, felt protected, felt worth saving. Still, the danger grew. In the dark corners of the colony, whispers had already begun. Whispers of strange light in Daniel's house, whispers of movement where there should be none. The colony's eyes were turning toward him, and in the shadows, secrets were no longer safe. The colony morning was cold and bright. Snow crunched under heavy boots as workers moved toward the gates. Children ran with sharp laughter, leaving trails of steam in the frozen air, and among them walked Mara, the neighbor, sharp-eyed, sharper-tongued. She lived 2 doors from Daniel, and she noticed everything. Mara had seen the light in his window late at night. She had seen his shadow moving long after others had gone to sleep. Her lips curled with suspicion. Daniel had always been strange, quiet, never fitting in. She wondered now if his strangeness hid something more. That afternoon, Daniel left his house, pulling his coat tight. He carried an empty water jug, his breath white in the air. Mara stood by her door pretending to sweep snow. Her eyes followed him as he passed, her voice too casual. "Cold morning, Daniel," she said. He gave her a short nod, his face unreadable, her eyes narrowed, catching the tension in his shoulders. Her instincts whispered that something was hidden behind his silence inside Daniel's home. The alien widow sat quietly, her body still weak but her mind restless. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every gust of wind against the wall felt like a hand knocking. She pressed her palms together, whispering in her own tongue, a prayer for safety, a plea to any stars that still listened. When Daniel returned with water, he found her staring at the door. "What is it?" he asked, setting down the jug. Her eyes met his, full of unease. "Someone watches," she whispered. Daniel frowned, glancing at the curtained window. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was only her fear, but deep inside, he felt the same pressure, the same eyes in the dark. That night, the colony leaders made an announcement. Torches burned in the square as people gathered, their breath clouds rising like smoke. The commander's voice rang out cold and final. "We remind all settlers, no alien blood is to be sheltered, no alien hands fed, no alien voice welcomed." The crowd murmured, some nodding, some looking away. "Those who break this law," the commander continued, "will face exile, their homes stripped, their names erased." Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, his fists clenched inside his coat. He felt Mara's eyes on him, sharp as knives, her lips pressed tight, as if she already carried words she wanted to whisper into the commander's ear. Back at home, Daniel locked the door behind him. The widow's eyes widened as she saw his face. "What did they say?" she asked quickly. Daniel threw his coat aside, pacing the small room. "They are searching harder now," he muttered. "They will come door to door soon." Her body stiffened, fear clear in her trembling hands. "If they find me," she began. "They won't," Daniel cut in, his voice hard, but in his chest, doubt coiled like a snake. The next day, Mara's knock echoed on his door. Daniel froze, then opened it only a crack. Mara's smile was thin, her eyes glittering with curiosity. "You're home a lot these days," she said, her tone sweet, but sharp. Daniel forced a shrug. "Work is slow." Her gaze slid past him into the room, though the blankets on the bed were hidden from sight. "Strange," she murmured. "I thought I heard voices here last night." Daniel's chest tightened, but he kept his face calm. "Storms carry sounds," he said simply, then shut the doctor before she could speak again. The widow stepped from the shadows, her voice barely a breath. "She knows." Daniel nodded slowly, his hand running through his hair. "Yes, she suspects. And if she talks to the commander—" He stopped, the thought heavy in the air. That evening, the knock came again, harder this time. But it was not Mara. It was the colony guards, 3 of them, their torches bright against the snow. Daniel opened the door, heart pounding. "Routine search," the guard said flatly, pushing past without waiting. They walked through the small house, their eyes sharp. Daniel stood still, forcing his breath steady. In the corner, the widow crouched beneath the floorboards, hidden by wood and shadows. Every creak of the guard's boots above her felt like thunder. One guard paused near the bed, staring at the blankets folded too neatly. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. But after a moment, the guard turned away, muttering, "Nothing here." They left as quickly as they came, the torchlight fading into the storm. Daniel shut the door with shaking hands, his back pressed against it. The widow crawled out, her face pale with fear. "We cannot stay," she whispered. But Daniel shook his head, his jaw set. "Leaving now is death," he said. "The storm will finish what the colony began." Yet he knew the truth. The walls around them were closing. Mara's eyes, the commander's orders, the guard's searches. It was only a matter of time before betrayal struck. And when it did, no storm would be needed. The colony itself would tear them apart. The night was restless. Daniel sat awake by the fire, listening for every sound outside. The widow lay under the blankets, though her eyes were not closed. Sleep was impossible when danger pressed against the walls of the house. For days, Mara's eyes had followed them, sharp and heavy. And now the guards came more often, their boots crunching outside the door. Each time they passed, Daniel felt his chest tighten. The colony was circling like wolves. It was no longer safe. That evening, as the storm rolled low across the horizon, a knock thundered against the door. Daniel froze, his knife in hand. This was not a soft knock, not a curious neighbor. It was the sound of fists ready to break wood. The widow's eyes widened, her hands gripping the blanket tight. "Guards," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his jaw locked. The door shook again under their strike, voices booming. "Open," by order of the commander. Daniel's heart pounded. If he opened, they would see her. If he refused, they would break the door and drag them both out. There was only one choice left. He leaned close to her, his voice sharp but steady. "The tunnels." Her eyes widened in shock. "They are not safe." "Safer than this," he cut her off, already pulling her to her feet. Her legs trembled, but strength returned under fear. Daniel opened a hidden hatch beneath the rug, revealing blackness below. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the scent of damp stone and old ice. The widow hesitated, her breath sharp. "No human walks those paths," she warned. Daniel gave a grim smile. "Then tonight one will." The pounding at the door grew louder, wood splintering. "Go," Daniel urged, and she climbed down into the dark. He followed, pulling the hatch closed above them. A second later, the door above crashed open, guards flooding into the empty house. But the house was no longer their prison. The tunnels stretched endless and black beneath the colony. Frozen walls glistened faintly, carved long ago by her people. The widow moved first, her hands brushing the ice as if she knew the way by memory. Daniel followed close, the darkness pressing heavy around him. The only sound was their boots on stone and the echo of their breath. Behind them, muffled voices rang through the house above. "Search everything," a guard ordered. But already Daniel and the widow were beyond their reach. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. Strange shapes marked the ice walls, symbols, scars of another world. Daniel touched one, feeling grooves carved by alien hands. "What do they mean?" he asked. The widow's voice was low, almost reverent. "They are warnings, marks of danger below." Before Daniel could reply, a sound echoed through the tunnels. A deep growl, rolling like thunder beneath the ground. His blood ran cold. The widow's face paled, her whisper trembling. "Frost beast." The sound grew louder, closer, a scraping of claws against stone, a heavy breath that shook the air. Daniel raised his knife, though he knew the blade was too small against such a creature. The widow pressed a hand against the wall, pulling him toward a side passage. "This way," she urged. They ran, their boots slipping on ice, the growl chasing them. Behind them, a shadow moved in the dark, vast and terrible. The tunnel narrowed, the ceiling dripping ice. Daniel's chest burned with every breath, his ears filled with the beast's roar. He glanced back, and for a heartbeat he saw it. Glowing eyes, white and endless, teeth like frozen spears. The ground shook as it lunged forward. Daniel grabbed the widow's arm, dragging her faster. They burst into a wider cavern, the ice walls glittering. Like glass, the widow pointed upward where a crack of pale light shone through the ceiling. "There," she gasped. Daniel saw rough steps carved into the wall. Ancient and sharp, the beast roared behind them, its claws scraping closer. "Climb!" Daniel shouted, pushing her toward the steps. She gripped the ice, hauling herself upward with desperate strength. Daniel followed, his hands tearing against the frozen stone. The beast leapt, snapping jaws missing his boots by inches. Its roar shook the cavern, sending shards of ice raining down. At last, the widow reached the crack of light, pulling herself through. Daniel climbed after her, the beast lunging again, its claw struck the wall, missing him but breaking the steps. Daniel scrambled, his hand catching the edge of the opening. The widow seized his wrist, pulling with all her strength. With one final heave, he tumbled out beside her. They collapsed in the snow above, gasping. The beast's roar faded below, trapped in the dark once more. Daniel lay on his back, chest heaving. Above them the storm raged, the colony lights distant. The widow looked at him, her breath clouding in the air. "You followed me into the dark," she said softly. Daniel turned his head toward her, his voice rough. "And I'll follow you out again." For a moment, they shared only silence, broken by the howl of the wind. But Daniel's eyes narrowed as he looked back toward the colony walls. Smoke rose from chimneys. Torches burned along the watchtowers. They had escaped the guards. They had survived the beast, but the colony would not stop. And now betrayal had already taken root inside their walls. Snow whipped across the open ground as Daniel and the widow stumbled away from the tunnel mouth. Their breaths came hard, their bodies weak. But they were alive. Behind them, the frost beast roared once more, its voice echoing from the depths of the earth. Though trapped, it was not defeated, and its hunger would not forget them. Daniel steadied the widow as she limped forward. Her body shook, her wounds from the cold still raw, but her eyes burned with strength that defied her weakness. "We cannot go back to the house," she whispered. "They will be waiting." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. The colony was no longer a home. It was a cage, and the walls were closing in. They moved through the storm, using the shadows of broken ice cliffs for cover. Every step felt like a stolen moment. But as the storm cleared, torches flared ahead. The guards, their shapes sharp against the snow, had found their trail. Daniel pulled the widow behind a ridge, his heart pounding. Voices carried through the wind. "They escaped the search. Find them before dawn." The widow gripped his arm, her voice low. "They will not stop until you are destroyed for helping me." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Then we make our stand," he said. The guards spread across the snow, their weapons glowing faintly in the cold light. Daniel and the widow crouched behind the ridge, but before the first guard reached them, the ground shook. A deep rumble tore through the night. Snow cracked, ice shattered, and from the shadows of the ridge came a roar. The frost beast had broken free. The guards froze, their torches flickering. From the broken earth, the beast rose, massive and terrible. Its eyes glowed white, its jaws dripping frozen. Mist. The storm itself seemed to bow to its presence. One guard shouted, "By the stars, what is that?" But his cry ended in a scream as the beast lunged, its claws tearing through the snow. Chaos exploded. Guards fired their rifles, the crack of energy flashing against ice. But the beast roared, each strike only angering it more. Daniel pulled, the widow further back, his mind racing. The beast was no ally, no enemy. It was death itself, striking all without care. The widow pressed her hand against the ice, whispering words in her own tongue. Daniel looked at her, desperate. "Do you know how to stop it?" Her eyes glistened, her voice trembling. "My people once fought them. Only fire, only light can drive them away." Daniel's eyes darted to the guards' torches, flames dancing weak in the storm, but they were scattered, dropped in fear. He grabbed one, shoving it into her hands. "Then we use this," he said. The beast charged again, tearing into a guard. The colony men scattered, some screaming, some still firing useless bolts. Daniel and the widow moved forward, the torch held high. The beast's eyes locked on them. Hunger blazing, it lunged, jaws wide, but as the fire flared bright, it stopped. The roar shook the ground, furious and afraid. The widow thrust the torch higher, her voice strong despite her wounds. "Back, shadow of ice," she cried. The beast reared, striking at the flame but never touching it. It stepped back, growling, before vanishing into the storm once more. The guards stared, their faces pale with terror and disbelief. But then their eyes turned to Daniel and the widow, and fear became anger. "You," one guard spat, pointing at Daniel. "You brought her here, you broke the law." Daniel's grip tightened on the knife in his hand, his voice hard. "I saved her life." The commander stepped forward, his face like stone. "And for that, you will lose yours." The guards closed in, weapons raised. The widow looked at Daniel, her voice urgent. "You cannot fight them all." Daniel shook his head, his jaw set. "Maybe not, but I'll make them. Remember this night." The first guard lunged, Daniel met him with steel, their blades clashed. Sparks in the snow, Daniel moved fast, fury driving his strength. But for every strike, 2 more guards circled. The widow gripped the torch tighter, swinging the flame to keep them back. The firelight reflected in her eyes, fierce and alive. For a moment, human and alien stood as one, outnumbered but unbroken. The storm howled around them. The beast's roar echoed once more in the distance. The guards hesitated, torn between law and survival. But the commander's voice cut through the fear. "Seize them both, dead or alive." Daniel's knife dripped with frost and blood. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. The widow's flame flickered in the wind. Together they stood, the law against them, the beast waiting beyond. In that frozen night there was no safety left, only a choice. To surrender to cruelty, or to fight until the storm itself remembered their defiance. The storm raged across the colony walls, snow twisting like a living veil. Daniel and the widow stood side by side, their breath rising in white clouds. Around them the guards circled, weapons drawn, eyes sharp with fear and anger. Behind the guards, the commander's voice cut through the wind, cold and merciless. "You have broken our law," he declared, "and for that, you will pay with your lives." The widow held the torch high, its flame trembling but alive. Daniel gripped his knife, his arm tired but steady. He looked at the faces of the men around him, some filled with hate, others with doubt. He raised his voice, strong enough to carry over the storm. "Look at her," he shouted. "She asked for shelter, nothing more." His voice cracked with fury. "And you left her to die in the snow, is that justice?" Some of the guards shifted uneasily, their grips on their weapons less certain. The widow's eyes burned with tears that did not fall. Her voice, low but steady, carried into the frozen air. "My mate died in your minds, while you saved only yourselves," she said. "You call me burden, you call me curse, but all I asked was a place to live." Her words struck deeper than the cold, and silence spread for a moment. Then the ground trembled again. From the broken ice cliffs came the roar of the frost beast, louder than before. It had not left. It had only waited, circling, hungry. The guards turned in fear, their weapons shaking. The commander shouted, "Hold your ground!" But his voice wavered. The beast burst into view, its glowing eyes like white fire, its body taller than the walls themselves. Snow crashed down with each of its steps, the storm answering its rage. The guards opened fire, bolts of energy slicing through the air. The beast roared, striking down, one man with its claw scattering the rest. Chaos erupted, screams mixing with the howling wind. Daniel grabbed the widow's arm, pulling her closer to the firelight. Her torch flared against the dark. The beast flinched. "Together," Daniel said, his voice raw. "We can hold it back." The commander, furious, pointed his weapon at Daniel instead of the monster. "You brought this curse upon us," he spat. "You and the alien." But before he could fire, the beast's tail struck, hurling him into the snow. The colony walls cracked under them. Blow, torches falling, defenses breaking. The settlement itself was dying under the storm and the beast's fury. The widow's voice rose above the chaos. "Your walls will not save you," she cried, "only mercy will." Her words rang like a bell, cutting through the fear. Some guards turned to her, their eyes wide. They saw not an enemy, but the only one who knew the tunnels, the paths, the ways of survival. Daniel stepped forward, his voice fierce. "She can guide us through the dark. She knows what we don't." He raised his knife, flame beside him. "You want to live? Then choose. Follow fear, or follow hope." The beast roared again, its massive body tearing through the colony gates. Snow and ice crashed inward, sweeping through the square. Colonists screamed, families huddled together, their homes breaking. Apart in that moment, the law no longer mattered, only survival did. A guard dropped his weapon, staring at Daniel. Another lowered his torch, nodding slowly. One by one, the crowd shifted, not toward the commander, but toward the man, and the widow. Fear had ruled them too long. But now fear of the beast was greater than fear of the law. The widow lifted her torch high, her voice carrying through the storm. "This way," she said, "through the tunnels, to safety." The colonists began to follow, mothers clutching, children, men carrying the wounded. Daniel moved beside her, leading them toward the hidden paths. The commander's broken voice shouted after them, but no one listened. Power had shifted, not by strength of law, but by choice. Through the tunnels they went, guided by the widow's memory. The beast's roars echoed behind, but fire kept it at bay. Hours later, they emerged into a sheltered valley, the storm calmer, the stars faint above. The colonists collapsed in the snow, alive but shaken, and there, under the broken night sky, silence fell. Daniel stood with the widow, watching the people who once turned her away. Some looked at her with shame, others with gratitude. No one spoke of law, no one spoke of exile. The only truth left was simple. Without her, they would all be dead. The widow turned to Daniel, her eyes soft. "You opened your door," she whispered. "And now they see." Daniel's chest ached, but he smiled faintly. Sometimes it takes one door to change them all. Behind them, the storm began to fade. The colony would rebuild, but never as it was before. For that night, humanity had faced its choice. Not law, not fear, but compassion had saved them. And in that choice, they found hope,